Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Global Discussion. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins. Today, real pleasure. Delighted to be joined by Karen Boswell. Karen, you're very welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's a delight to be here.
Before we get started, let's just maybe set a little bit of context. Tell people a little bit about Karen, the work that you do, maybe a little bit about some of your experience. Just set the scene a little bit, and then I've got some questions I really want to get into with you.
Absolutely happy to. So I work in change is probably the simplest way to explain what I do. I've had a somewhat amorphous career. I generally look for where the biggest rub is and jump in and try and fix it. So sort of started as a designer, moved into product, and I've scaled up a lot of that thinking to now look at organizations and how we can positively disrupt to build to something more future-proof.
Look, there's a lot we can unpack there, but I want to start the conversation, if I can, Karen, with something that I know is close to your heart and something I'm thinking about a lot. I'm doing a lot of work with, I'm going to say the word AI, but with human expertise. And I know you think a lot about being more human centered, maybe putting human first. Could you unpack that a little bit and how that sort of how you think about that from your perspective and the work that you do with individuals and companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd start with flipping it to answer the question really simply. So, humans are the origin of creativity, strategy. I stand by that. I've worked in the creative industries for longer than I'd like to admit, but I firmly believe that the origination of thought needs to remain with humans. However, the world is disrupted, it's complicated, and AI tooling and AI support, when built in the right way around the authenticity that humans can bring to the party, can help expedite how brilliant people can think, perform, bounce, spar. And there's a number of different ways that can come out. At a simple level, how do we take all the mundane crap away from the day to day so that you're freed to do more of the exciting stuff? And that's work I've been doing for probably best part of a decade now in various different teams and organizations. Further to that, then I think the world that we're in now is, what's an agentic layer to an organization? So one of the things I'm doing within M+C Saatchi is actually trying to create the craft of different skills within avatars, for want of a better way of summarizing it. But a mini creative, a mini strategist, but exemplifying the absolute best of the thinking and the originality that comes out of it. We're particularly pioneering it in our brand consulting teams, which is where a lot of the insight and intelligence that shapes the work comes from. And it's really interesting. I've only been in the role for, a number of months, but we're in the really exciting stages of just sort of trying to develop how could we enable our humans to be turbocharged with versions of themselves as an agentic layer to how the team are going to operate moving forward. So that gets us into a whole space of some further complexities, but also some real excitement when we get the balance right. And we're just sort of in that beta mode at the moment.
It's a very exciting place to be. And we hear a lot of headlines, don't we, about agentic AI,
Mhm.
about agents, about changing workflows and everything. How does that actually translate into real world strategy, though? Because at some point that hits a human, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are there any sort of tips or advice or any sort of viewpoints from your vantage and your great experience in terms of how we smooth that out a little bit, how we get the waters a little bit calmer? Because sometimes it can feel quite dramatic. The headlines are fast and furious. Everything seems to be changing around us.
So it's very easy to dive into detail there, but actually what I'm going to do is answer this from how I approach the whole sort of picture when I'm looking at complex organizations, which can be 5 people or 50 people or 500 people. There's often, when you put AI into the mix, complexity there. So there's essentially, for me, 3 jobs to be done. There's considering how you bring AI into the way that an organization can work. So, how do you leverage tools, products, platforms, however you want to frame and connect them to better connect, to better lift, to better to support flowing of work from the moment an ask comes into a business to the point where the thinking has perhaps ended, and then you move into job 2, which is the work that you make. So the way that you work, the work that you make. And then you're into like an output series of, perhaps in my world, it's sort of looking at things like automating content, looking at media planning and buying. And the rules of engagement are a little bit different for obvious things. So, origination of thought, what we don't want is AI claiming IP on what we do, so that kind of gets us into a real space of leading with human and supporting with AI. That's a really clear directive for us. When it comes to the work that you make, the precedent is normally set in terms of where the idea has come from. So then it's about the North Star and the guardrails around when something can be automated and when it needs some refinement. And that's a real toggle. And to be honest, it's something that changes all the time. So we're always kind of on the edge of what that looks like. And then around that, there's a third job, which is operationalizing all of it, which is not my deep area of expertise. I tend to come at it from, making sure that we have the integrity of the creative and the strategy and the thinking, and then the making of the technology and the data and the AI that all kind of clicks together. And I know a lot of those words are interchangeable. Could call it all technology, could call it all data, but take it as it comes. There's a lot of words out there. But in that operating layer, you might consider things like, do you want enterprise ChatGPT licenses? What does that mean for people that are using it as a shortcut? Does it add to why your company exists, your brand promise, or does it deteriorate from because you kind of dip into being a bit too reliant? And humans are inherently lazy, like it's just in our nature. And so it's making sure that you have that coherency of cut through versus the sort of quick path to mediocrity. Because to your point, we look at LLMs and we look at how people are searching within AI, and the answer's kind of proposed for you based on some assumptions and probabilities. And so even at a very base level, we're taking away that human thought. And it's very easy to become reliant on what's given back to you when it sounds versed, when it sounds researched, and when it's presented to you in a nice pithy tone. So it's an interesting rub. So we try and separate those rules of thumb out for us.
Yeah, the outputs today, I'm smiling as you're talking because the outputs today, they convince you that it's perfectly acceptable and it's of course it's right.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you as well, just something that you said there. And I love, by the way, I love the way you zoomed out and thought and sort of focused on that. Well, actually, this is how you need to think about it. This is how you need to approach it. Do you find that people are just rushing in and applying this on top of things that probably need a bit more thought before you start layering in this new way of working?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the positive rubs that I quite often work at the intersection of. So I'm all for black ops, kind of, get it up, get it running, try it, fail forward fast. One of my nicknames is actually Bosops for exactly that reason, because it's kind of you sort of need that keeping up with the speed of change mentality. However, what you need is the framing to make sure that when things bubble up past a prototype, they're connected into something that makes sense at a bigger layer. Otherwise, you end up with just a mess that the bigger it gets, the faster it becomes an exponential problem, because AI is much, much quicker at connecting dots, and the more dots there are to connect, it's that sort of exponential spread. So it's that whole, sort of Dan Kahneman theory of thinking fast and slow, just translated into organizational mode of what makes sense to think fast. What do we need to then connect to make sure that that longer term purity. And again, I think in my world, it's always interesting to think about transformation through two lenses. So I look at now next, where are we stood today? What are the incremental changes we need to make to move ourselves forward? And they will get you little baby steps. And those baby steps will be very relevant to the quarter in front of you or the quarter beyond that. And then I adopt a second strategy, which is what sci-fi writers do when they write movies. They stand in the future. They're in 2050, they're imagining it, they're designing it, they're drawing it, they're writing it, they understand what people are saying about them. And then you look back to today and you look at what success has to be, what milestones you have to overcome. And that gives you the more seismic shifts. And it's the same when I look at technology or AI adoption. You kind of do now to next and future back, and then you get a really robust transformation plan.
I love the way you frame that in terms of now to next and standing in the future. I really like that. I wanted to ask you something about the creative side and the brand side, coming back maybe to some of your other career experience, because I know you're no stranger to Cannes and
Mhm.
South by Southwest and the Drum and D&AD and all that great stuff. So, what about this sort of output world that we live in, where it can become a bit adverty as opposed to a bit more of a brand piece? So, what does that mean? Do you think a lot more today, or how should we be thinking about brand trust, maybe brand permission? Any thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, so I don't think you can advertise your way out of a situation you've behaved your way into. And so when I think about the role of a brand, which is the face of a business, and Bob Iger says this brilliantly, a brand is its relationship between a customer and a product. That's it, right? So you've got to create relevant products and services that customers want and need. That's the permission you earn to be where somebody wants something that is currently not met in a marketplace. Um, what advertising does is share the story of that thing, the need you're solving. What I think gets convoluted quite a lot is a brand brief will come in through an advertising door and you spend a lot of money perhaps communicating the wrong message or a message in the wrong way because you haven't listened to the audience need and you haven't matched the product and the need to find that white space and your credible, authentic brand space, therefore, to tell your story. And so they're interconnected. The simplest way I explain it, I get asked this question quite a lot, is if there's a problem to be solved, it's a brand brief. If there's a story to be told, it's an advertising brief.
I love that. That's a great way of putting it. And I really like your approach to that. Because on one hand, it actually sounds, and I mean this in the nicest way, it sounds very straightforward and simple. But I know sometimes the execution of that, particularly with organizations and other humans involved, can be quite tricky. And it leads me to my last question, unfortunately, which is about maybe the future. We do a little bit of crystal ball gazing, a little bit of fortune telling here, because I know you're passionate about, the future of human centered approach to business, that human centered organization, and also this requirement that seems to be everywhere at the moment to be able to design for change.
Mhm.
So, anything you'd like to wrap us up with in terms of some thoughts around as we move forward, because this doesn't seem to be going away. If anything, it seems to be speeding up in terms of our requirements in this area as humans working in business.
It's a really hard one because I think it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's going on around us, and just in the technology space, let alone everything else that's going on around us, generally at large. Um, and I try my best to practice being brave when it comes to adopting the right mindset, the right technology, building the right team. And that can sometimes mean making really hard decisions between when is it right for the good of a business to look at a team structure in a way that might not mean hiring bums on seats, but instead building agentic support systems. Okay, that's a tough decision because somewhere somebody is out of a job that, probably needs that job. Then you have other scenarios, which is just sort of more around the work that you make. So if you take that example as an inside out view, and then you've got the work that you make, I think there's a bit of a fight. Back to your brand advertising question, that same question comes up time and again in lots of different places, this versus that. And everybody's like, we do that, we do that, we do that. And it just causes a bit of a bum fight. It's a race to the bottom. You dissolve your pricing premium. You have to undercut all the time, which means you have to underserve, which means the pressure on cheaper solutions like AI, who don't need feeding and work around the clock. So it becomes a real swirl really quickly if you can't stand in that sort of authentic space. So all of that to say, as much as I can, as best as I can, and it's never this simple, when just as we say to our clients, you can't advertise your way out of a situation you've behaved your way into. It's the same. Like you've got to have a promise, have some proof points, and close the gap between the promise and the proof. And the closer you get to closing that gap, the better an organization performs. And I mean both in terms of its people and its profit. So again, if you really bubble it down, it's find the right people, find the right purpose, connect the dots through technology in the right way that makes something authentic more credible, and try to sort of stay in those fringes. I think it can get messy quick if you spray and pray, as it were.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And I think it's a great note for us to end on. I do want to squeeze a quick question in though. If people are interested in this sort of intersection of brand and business and everything that we've been talking about here today, and maybe want to find out a little bit more, or catch up with some of the things that maybe you're sharing out there, where's the best place to point people to, Karen, these days?
I'd probably point them to my LinkedIn and drop me a message. There's a lot going on, lots of change, lots of movement, some open roles. Who knows? Hit me
Very
up.
good. That's a reason, if nothing else, to go and check that out. Karen has lots of expertise in this area. I would highly recommend checking that out because there's always something interesting going on. And Karen, I want to thank you sincerely for spending some time with me here today. You shared some really great insights, some understanding of your world, and also some great takeaways for people. I also want to thank our audience around the world who's watching or listening to this episode. If you like what we're doing here, make sure you give us a follow or a subscribe. And I hope to see you back here where I'll be talking to more creatives and more leaders and more thinkers just like Karen. But Karen, thanks for being on the show. It's been great to talk to you again today.
Thank you, Simon. It was a pleasure.